My name is Marc Baer, and I'm a historian. As you can tell from my accent, perhaps, I come from the US, but I spent part of my childhood in Germany, and that's where I learned German, and that's also where I had my bar mitzvah in 1983 in Kaiserslautern, West Germany. So I was in Berlin 10 years ago, working on a very different research project, because I'm actually professionally a historian of the Ottoman Empire and of Turkey and of relations between Muslims and Jews in Turkey. And I was researching the descendants of the followers of Shabbatai Tzvi, the Messiah from the 17th century. His followers exist to this day. And I was following them in Berlin. When I found out that the leading Turk in Berlin, in Weimar and Nazi Berlin, was a descendant of these radical Jews. And I found out at the same time that across town, at the only mosque in Germany, the leading German Muslim was another Jew, was a real Jew, was a convert to Islam. And so I thought, well, this is interesting. And so 10 years later, after reading thousands of pages of writing from this person in Basel, that are now held in Basel and in Bern, and in Zurich and in LA and in Berlin, after reading thousands of pages of German language private letters and erotic poetry and unpublished mosque lectures and police and concentration camp records and his published philosophical work and his pacifist work and his avant-garde work and his Islamic works and his homoerotic short stories and novellas, 10 years of reading about this man's life, I realized that what this person shows is that a person in his life was able to be simultaneously German and Jewish and gay and Muslim. Now, it turns out that I'm the first person to write his biography, probably because he was a Jew who became Muslim. Jews don't like to write about that. Probably because he was a Muslim who was gay. Muslims don't like to write about that. And also for Germans. Here's a man who's Jewish and Muslim, and also saying I'm German too. So I found out about his life. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some slides as I talk. So allow me to try that. And in only about 10 or 15 minutes, I'll give a history of his life, and then I'll be happy to take questions or complaints or whatever you have. So let's see if this works. I think it looks like it's working to me. 1 second. Here we are. Right. So can everyone see that? I hope you can see yes, good, okay. So Marcus was a novelist. He was a poet. He was a philosopher. He was a political activist, and he was a writer. And he spent his whole life searching for utopias, or for him, brotherhoods, warm brotherhoods. After completing his secondary school in Imperial Germany in Posen in 1898, he migrated to Berlin. And around that time, he joined the first organization in the world to campaign for the rights of homosexuals. It was the Scientific Humanitarian Committee, founded by his lifelong friend and fellow Jew, Magnus Hirschfeld. Now, like many other sons of German Jewish provincial families in Imperial Germany, Marcus then studied philosophy at Berlin's University, and there he befriended another key person in the gay rights struggle, and this was Kurt Hiller, another activist of Jewish background, whose 1922 book entitled Paragraph 175, The Disgrace of the Century, is a seminal work in the homosexual rights struggle. Now, Marcus found two pathways to what he conceived of as divinity. He first joined this creepy guy. He joined the George Circle, which was a quasi-religious group composed of the rapturous middle-class youth disciples, especially male disciples, of the poet and prophet Stefan George. And they thought of themselves as avant-gardes waging a cultural and a spiritual war of redemption to renew Germany. And their membership just so happened to overlap that of the masculinist homosexual circles. But Marcus then fell under the spell of another group. He went on to join the Ahmadi movement for the propagation of Islam, which is an Islamic confessional minority born in British India, and he became the only Jewish convert and member in Berlin. It was founded by this man. Now, prior to the First World War, Marcus earned some renown with a half a dozen philosophical works. In one of these, called Meditations, written while he was still a doctoral student, we catch a hint of his openness to join a new spiritual community. Now that book, like the work of George, is full of a feeling of aristocratic homoeroticism, if there is such a thing, whose major themes are the love between men and young men, the master-disciple relationship, and again, a search for a new utopia. But Marcus didn't have the luxury of being able to devote himself to these philosophical pursuits. Like other Jewish youth sent to the capital to seek higher education to help his family, he was expected to work in a family business. But the First World War would change that. During the war, Marcus worked with Hitler in the latter's pacifist organization called the Activist League. And he served on the staff of the pacifist socialist journal, Das Ziel, the Aim, the yearbook for spiritual politics. Maybe it's something we need right now, spiritual politics. After the war, Marcus's father lost his entire fortune when Prussian Posen became Polish Poznan. But Marcus considered this an unbelievable lucky break because it freed him of the unbearable obligation to inherit his family's wood finishing business. It was also as a result of this that he found Islam, presented to him as a brotherhood, a universal brotherhood that united men of all nations and races, and that, as he quickly discovered, promotes homosocial bonds. To support his family, he began working as a German tutor to young Muslim men from the Ahmadi mission, which is a community not unlike the George Circle, in that both consisted of disciples who were devoted to the teachings of a charismatic master seen as a prophet, and who perceived themselves as a select few, waging a war to redeem the soul of Germany. He made a very strong impression on the mosque community. In 1923, the Ahmadi hired him for life as editor of all of its German language publications. And he formed an especially close bond with the sheikh, handsome, bachelor, Mevlana Sadr ad-Din, the imam of the mosque, about whom Marcus wrote erotic poetry. Inspired by the imam, Marcus converted to Islam in 1925. But it would be mistaken, as many people do, to consider the pre- and post-conversion phases of his life to be distinct. Marcus viewed Islam in a Jewish way, as a rational and pure expression of Jewish monotheism. And reflecting the fact that he was gay, he promoted the idea that one of the core pillars of Islam is purity, which includes pacifism, love and beauty, brotherhood, and tolerance of exceptional cases like himself. He was creating an Islam for gay men like himself. And for a dozen years, under the adopted name Hamid, the praised one, he was the most important German in Berlin's mosque community. Nevertheless, he did not terminate his membership in the Jewish community or cut his ties to Jewish friends and family, including his mother. And despite his conversion to Islam, he did not end his attachments with friends in the homosexual rights movement either, or with his younger, blonde-haired, Polish Catholic friend, Roman Maliki, a fellow native of Posen either. The year of Marcus's conversion, he helped craft and he signed a petition that was organized by Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Science and sent to the Justice Minister, urging repeal of paragraph 175 of the Criminal Code, which penalized, in the law's language, unnatural sexual acts between men. So even though he was a Muslim, he continued his gay activism. Now, Marcus was the leading German Muslim in the Islamic community, centered on the first mosque in Germany, established by Muslims, the Berlin Mosque, completed in 1927 by the Ahmadi. Marcus played a key role in interpreting Islam for Germans. He was chief editor of their journal, the Muslim Review. He was chairman of the German Muslim Society. He lectured often. He was probably the most frequent lecturer at the Society's monthly public Islam evenings. And these evenings were attended by his friends and acquaintances from the gay rights and also literary circles. So Thomas Mann, for example, and also Hermann Hesse. He also edited a Quran translation, commentary, and introduction that's used today in Germany. In his mosque lectures and publications, he promoted this utopian project of an Islam for Germany. He went out of his way to argue that Muslim values were German values. And what he meant by this was that he believed that the great German writer, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, he believed that Goethe was a Muslim like him. This is something you hear from German Muslims. After all, in Goethe's poems such as Muhammad's Song and Hymn, and in his West-East Divan, also in his incomplete Muhammad tragedy, Goethe wrote or stated such things as, "The truly sublime Quran attracts me, astonishes me, and in the end elicits my admiration." He also wrote, "I have contemplated, devoutly celebrating that holy night when the Quran in its entirety was revealed to the prophet from on high." Goethe wrote, "The writer of this book, the West-East Divan, does not even reject the supposition that he may be a Muslim." And most famously, Goethe wrote the couplet, "I find it foolish and quite odd that stubborn folk seek to deny. If Islam means we all serve God, we all in Islam live and die." So Marcus took these at face value. Of course, Goethe wasn't a Muslim. He wasn't a member of any religion. But Marcus used this so-called conversion to make an argument about German Islamic culture. He envisioned being German as viewing the world in the Muslim Goethe's terms. For Germans, being Muslim was to read Islam in a Goethean way. So rather than see converts such as Marcus as mediators between foreign Muslims and local Christians, between India, which is where his Islamic already came from, and Germany, we can see these new Muslims as playing a role in responding to the crisis in 1920s German society. Marcus's astonishing analysis of the crisis reflects the broader debate about the future of German society that marked Weimar Germany. Facing utter and complete change, Germans debated how to rebuild society. What could speak to the disillusion with received religion and the demand for new answers? If the war's end served as a rupture that invalidated the past and served as a departure for a new future, then what should that future look like? In Weimar Germany, religious and philosophical crisis produced a sense of possibility. Weimar crisis talk provided Germans with a chance for rejuvenation. In this era, intellectuals blended contradictory elements into blueprints for the future. And one such utopian vision brought Islam together with German Enlightenment culture and Romanticism. So Marcus, rather than accept that Enlightenment values had been proved false, or that German culture was bankrupt, reevaluated the ideas and contributions of the greatest German thinkers, not only Goethe, but also Nietzsche, to make them relevant and useful for stepping back from the moral abyss and providing for a spiritually sound future. Islam, as he called it, the religion of eternal self-renewal, taking something from Nietzsche, belonged both to Germany's past and to its future, according to Marcus. It was the country's only salvation, but other Germans had other ideas. Marcus's envisioned potential for future for Germany was not to be. The year after Marcus made arguments promoting an Islamic state guided by a cultural elite, including himself, the Nazis seized power. Marcus was incarcerated in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, not as a Muslim. No Muslims were incarcerated there because they are Muslims. Not as a gay. Of course, gays were incarcerated in Sachsenhausen, and the gays incarcerated in Sachsenhausen did not survive. Most of the German Jewish men who were incarcerated as gays also did not survive. But Marcus was incarcerated, was taken into camp as a Jew in 1938, following the November 9th and 10th pogrom. He was brutalized and held in the barracks newly constructed for the thousands of recently arrested Jewish men. He claimed to have remained there until a delegation led by his imam, at that time Dr. Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, gained his release. In fact, Abdullah obtained a visa for Marcus to travel to British India, where a position at the Ahmadi World Headquarters awaited him. But just before the outbreak of the Second World War, in fact, about a week before the war broke out, using travel documents secured by the imam and with the assistance of his international network of gay acquaintances in Germany, in Switzerland, and in the United States, he was able to escape to Basel, Switzerland instead, where he intended to establish an Islamic cultural center. His life was saved by taking refuge in Switzerland in 1939. After the war, he refused to return to the Federal Republic of Germany because the Federal Republic of Germany persecuted gay men by implementing paragraph 175's harsher version introduced by the Nazis. Just as he was known as Hamid to Muslims, Marcus was called Hans Alienus, Latin, Hans the Stranger, by other gay men, a reference to his being a German exile. Writing under that pseudonym, he was a frequent contributor to the international gay journal Der Kreis, the Circle, published in Zurich, the only German language gay journal which featured articles from members of the pre-war German homosexual rights movement. Everywhere, it was a forbidden magazine, read in secret, passed from hand to hand, the lifeblood of a secret organization that hosted costume balls. It was as an island of continuity from Weimar, Germany. And perhaps you saw the film, Oscar-nominated film, the Swiss film about the Circle from several years ago. Marcus published fiction, sometimes containing Islamic elements, and nonfiction in the journal, Der Kreis, the Circle, from the age of 68 to 85, from 1948 to 1965. Just as he had modeled his own conversion narrative on the so-called conversion narrative of Goethe, and sought precedent in his own appreciation for Muhammad and Islam and his, Marcus again turned to the writing and life of Goethe as personal and literary precedent and legitimizer for his own gay feelings and identity. For just as Goethe's writing exhibits unmistakable praise for Muhammad and Islam, as well as apparent adoption of Islamic views, causing German Muslims to think he was a Muslim, So does Goethe's early poetry, such as To the Moon and Ganymede, written around the same period as his Muhammad Song and The Elf King, and as well as his prose, including Faust. I mean, how many of you have read Faust? What is the bargain anyway? Also his Italian journey, Letters from Switzerland, Wilhelm Meister's journeyman years, and his West-East Divan written when he was mature. All of this work offers explicit homoeroticism, admiration of male beauty, and love between male friends, and the theme of pederasty, giving rise to queer readings of the man and his age. And there are a lot of quotes I can choose from here, if you're not familiar with Goethe. Hadn't Goethe written, quote, in actual fact, Greek pederasty is based on the fact that measured purely aesthetically, the man is, after all, far more beautiful, more excellent, more perfect than the woman. Pederasty is as old as humanity, and therefore it may be said that it is rooted in nature. In fact, sexologists in the 1920s would take Goethe's writing as modern theories of homosexual nature. Goethe also wrote, I like to see young creatures gather around me and befriend me. One unpleasant experience after another failed to bring me back from this inborn drive, which at present, in the event of the most explicit conviction, still threatens to lead me astray. He wrote, what a glorious shape my nude friend has, how duly proportioned all his limbs are, what fullness of form, what splendor of youth, what a gain to have enriched my imagination with this perfect model of manhood. And perhaps most famously, again, from the West-East Divan, it's a couplet written from the youth wine server to a mature man. He says, but my love is yet more dear when a memory kiss I win. Words go by and disappear, yet your gift remains within. Now, Marcus is the first and perhaps only writer to maintain that Goethe was Muslim and gay like him. Now, while Goethe and those like him could not have had a gay identity, which emerged in the late 19th century, of course, some of you may have a different view, but that's my view. They were part of a subculture, this is for sure. They were part of a subculture based on same-sex desire, whose signifiers prefigured the identity of the modern homosexual. Among the signifiers were Greek antiquity, look at the picture here on the screen, and culture, particularly the propensity for male-male love, the socially acceptable erotic relationship between a man and a youth. Also biblical traditions, Orientalism, the Orient, a region stretching from the Muslim world to Italy, where one found classical civilization and sexuality perpetuated. Also Switzerland, and the cult of friendship, Freundesliebe, between men, which surpassed a man's love for a woman, was seen as an effusive, passionate, and intimate relationship. Now, if these were the signifiers of homosexuality for Goethe, so are they in the fiction of Marcus, where one finds the erotic themes of the beauty of the male nude, the superiority of male-male unrequited love or desire to male-female consummated love, temptation and awakened yet never consummated desire, the meaning of true friendship, Christian imagery, and ancient Greek mythology. So just to conclude, again, I've already talked probably for far too long. Queer Muslims are hardly conceivable in most discussions about Islam and homosexuality in Europe today. How much more is this the case for a Muslim man before gay liberation? Unlike as is often the case for Muslims in Europe today, however, following the mass migration of Muslims to the continent after the Second World War, no one could ask Marcus, where do you come from, as he was German. But as with the far right today, the Nazis told him, you do not belong here, but because he was also Jewish, not because he was Muslim. His answer, I am from here, was as unacceptable to the Nazis then as it is to Islamophobes in Europe today. A biography of Marcus may help us to simultaneously queer Jewish, Islamic, and perhaps even German history. So this book that I wrote, and now you don't have to even bother reading it because in the last 15 minutes I've told you everything that's in it, is the first biography devoted to examining the life of a German born as Hugo Marcus, who became the Muslim Hamid, who the Nazis forced to be renamed Israel, a gay man who never called himself gay, but fought his entire life for homosexual rights, who chose to write gay fiction under the pen name Hans Avianus during his decades of Swiss exile. He saw Goethe as his pole star, model German, model gay, and model Muslim, whose life and writing offered a solution to Germany's cultural crisis. And I thank you very much for giving this opportunity to speak to you this evening.